In the sterile hum of a military briefing room, a scarred wrist tells a story no one dares to speak. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Rock, a forgotten hero of a near-fatal F-35 ejection, steps into a world of ambition and skepticism, where young cadets mock her faded uniform and officers cling to polished narratives. But when a general's gaze locks on her scar, the room falls silent, and a hidden truth begins to unravel. A truth forged in fire, buried by bureaucracy, and powerful enough to change the skies forever. What secrets does her scar hold, and how will one woman's resilience rewrite the future for those who dare to fly? Step into her story, feel the weight of her courage, and discover the strength born from survival. She was cut off mid-sentence, right where the official story usually ended. But inside that silent briefing room, the real story was only just beginning. General Castillo's presence still anchored the energy in the room, his folded arms resting on the edge of the table as he nodded to Dana with a reverence rarely shown in rooms full of uniforms. All eyes were on her now, not out of ridicule or skepticism, but from a quiet anticipation. The woman once mocked was now commanding the room with nothing but the gravity of her presence and the history written on her skin. Dana's fingers brushed the scar again as she steadied herself. Her eyes met the young faces before her, some still fresh with inexperience, others already bearing the subtle wear of long hours in the cockpit or the fatigue of relentless drills. I was reassigned, she said finally, her voice more resolute, to roles that kept me grounded. Technical evaluations, data reviews. They told me I was too injured to fly, that I was better used behind a desk. A flicker of something unspoken passed over her face. Bitterness? Maybe. But there was more, something deeper, shaped by the years she had spent fighting not just for herself, but for others. For a while I believed them. The pain, the rehabilitation, it consumes you, makes you doubt. But what hurt more wasn't the fire or the surgeries. It was the silence, the way they buried the incident like it was an embarrassment. Like my survival was inconvenient. The room was still. Even Major Kading, who had initially tried to remove her, now sat motionless, the stern lines of his face softened by something bordering on guilt, or perhaps realization. They classified everything, Dana continued. The test results, the seat design flaws, even my name. I became Pilot A in every internal memo, a ghost in their records. I started asking questions. Why it failed? Who knew? When they knew? That's when the resistance started. She didn't have to explain what she meant. Everyone in the room understood what it meant to push against the system from within, how hierarchy could suffocate truth when convenience demanded it. I met with engineers. Some of them were brave enough to talk. One man in particular, Thomas Everett from Lockheed, risked everything to share the suppressed data. That seat was never ready for live tests, and they knew it. General Castillo nodded slowly, confirming her words with the quiet authority of someone who had seen the same files, and the consequences of ignoring them. That's when I made a choice, Dana said, her voice tightening. I could either let it go and disappear, or I could speak, even if it meant standing alone. She paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. That scar, she said softly, lifting her wrist again. It isn't just tissue, it's memory, it's accountability, it's every decision someone made without thinking what it might cost. A long silence followed. Then, from the middle row, a voice broke through. Cadet Ramirez, young, wide-eyed, with a hint of anger behind his empathy, spoke up. Why didn't they ever tell us? Why didn't we learn this in our safety modules? Dana met his gaze with something like sorrow. Because admitting fault in a billion-dollar program means shaking the whole foundation, and it's easier to rewrite the narrative than confront the truth. That's why I'm here, so that maybe one of you doesn't become the next Pilot A. Cadet Kyle Mercer, the one who had mocked her earlier, now looked down at his phone, his earlier joke lingering in the group chat like a stain he couldn't erase. He didn't speak, but the shift in his posture said everything. This wasn't just another guest speaker. This was history alive in front of them, and he had misjudged her. Captain Lewis, head of flight safety, cleared his throat. The logistical challenges of what she's asking, transparency, real-time equipment reviews, they're not small, he said carefully. But maybe it's time we stop weighing safety against convenience. From the back of the room, Dr. Emily Saunders watched Dana closely. The psychologist's quiet presence had gone unnoticed until now, but her nod carried deep respect. "What you did," she said, "was more than survive. You reclaimed the narrative. That's one of the hardest forms of healing." Dana turned to her, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Then Lieutenant Harper, barely 24 and fresh from his first high-stress mission, raised his hand. His voice trembled. "Ma'am, I've been struggling with the pressure. I didn't think anyone at your level would understand." "I do," Dana replied without hesitation. "I know what it means to fear the next flight, to wonder if your body or your mind will betray you. And that's exactly why we need to talk about it, all of it. Not just hardware failures, but the silent damage we carry." Colonel Whitman stood at the edge of the room, having listened intently the entire time. As base commander, he had heard countless briefings, but none like this. "We balance readiness with safety every day," he said. "But I think today proves something else, that silence is the enemy of both." General Castillo looked to him, then back at Dana. "Your seat at this table isn't just symbolic, Colonel Rock. It's earned." Dana nodded once, her expression unreadable but fierce. The scar remained visible, unapologetic, as she placed both hands flat on the table and leaned in. "From here on," she said, "we do not bury the past, we confront it. Because the next cadet who ejects might not get a second chance." And just like that, the briefing had become something more than a tactical session. It was a reckoning, a lesson not in manuals, but in truth. And the room, once buzzing with ambition and noise, now held only the quiet power of listening. They had come to learn about flight. Instead, they learned what it meant to fall and rise again. System failure. It is a testament to what it means to carry the burden of truth in a world that often favors silence. A hush lingered, pressing against every wall of the room. Dana stood still, her hands loosely clasped before her when the faded burn on her wrist catching the faint light from the projector. The image frozen on screen, her body mid-ejection, a blur of fractured metal and force, hovered like a ghost above them all. No one moved. No one spoke. Cadet Ramirez, still standing, wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, then slowly sat down, jaw set in quiet defiance. Across from her, Cadet Kyle Mercer no longer slouched with indifference. His spine was rigid now, his eyes locked on Dana with a raw, unguarded intensity. Dana glanced down, collecting herself, the memory still fresh despite the years. "They said the odds were 1 in a million," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But what happens when you're the one?" She turned her gaze back to the room, no longer just a classroom, but a crucible. "That one becomes a story, a warning, a responsibility." Major Keating's expression had hardened into something unreadable. Beneath his folded arms, a flicker of conflict passed through his eyes. His voice, when it finally emerged, was lower, more measured. "Lieutenant Colonel, I don't question the pain you endured, but change, real change, requires consensus, funding, timing. It's not as simple as telling the truth." Donna tilted her head, not with defiance, but with clarity. "Change begins the moment someone refuses to stay silent." At that, General Castillo stepped forward once again, hands behind his back. His tone was commanding, yet steady. "This institution trains for excellence. But excellence without integrity is hollow. What we heard today cannot remain an anecdote. It must inform how we lead, how we design, how we protect our own." The projector screen blinked out, leaving the room momentarily in dim silence. Only the echo of the truth remained, lingering in every corner. From the back, Captain Lewis cleared his throat, hesitating before speaking. "If the Lieutenant Colonel is willing, perhaps we can collaborate, integrate this data into future safety modules, not just as a case study, but as a cornerstone." Dana gave a small nod, restrained but genuine. "That's all I've ever asked." Dr. Emily Saunders, who had remained quiet throughout, jotted a note in her planner and looked up, her voice gentle but firm. "And if I may add, trauma like this doesn't vanish when the scars fade. It evolves. Hiding it doesn't make us stronger. It leaves us unprepared." General Castillo offered her a slight nod, then turned toward the young pilots in the room. "There's no simulation for what she went through, no script, But this is the closest you'll ever get to understanding the stakes. Lieutenant Harper, seated quietly in the second row, finally spoke. Her voice trembled, barely more than a breath. Sometimes, I'm afraid I won't know what to do when everything goes wrong. Dana walked toward her, slow and deliberate, her boots echoing against the floor. She crouched slightly so her voice met Harper's at eye level. Then you remember this moment. You remember that surviving isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. A new silence settled. Not the stunned kind, but something reverent, deep, resolute. As the cadets filed out later, one by one, most cast one last glance at the woman who had stood, unflinching, before them, at the wrist, still scarred, at the face, no longer hidden behind protocol or rank, but open, vulnerable, and therefore unshakably strong. Dana remained behind as the lights flickered back to life. General Castillo approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "You didn't just speak the truth today," he said. "You rewrote the future." She looked out the window to the flight line bathed in golden light. "Let's make sure it stays written." He nodded once. "I'll see to it." Then quietly he left her alone, just for a moment, to breathe in what it meant to finally be heard. And this time the silence was not an absence. It was respect. Dana's candor sat forward and asked, "Ma'am, do you believe things are changing now?" There was a long pause. Dana looked at him, young, eager, the kind of cadet who might one day take the same seat she once did. Her gaze softened. "Slowly," she said, "change in a system like ours is never swift, but it's happening. And it happens because of rooms like this. People like you, who listen, who ask, who challenge." She stepped away from the projector, the soft hum of the machine still filling the silent gaps in the room. On the screen behind her, a slide displayed side-by-side comparisons of the old ejection sequencing and the updated model. Red annotations bled across the schematic, each one a quiet testimony to pain transformed into progress. Dana turned back toward the class. "When I woke up in that hospital, I couldn't move my left side. I couldn't even hold a pen. And yet the thing that hurt most wasn't physical. It was being told to be silent, to pretend it never happened, to become invisible for the sake of optics." Cadet Mercer, who had smirked at the beginning of the session, now sat unmoving, his gaze locked on Dana with a new clarity. His earlier arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by something more human. Remorse, perhaps, or awakening. "The reports were redacted," Dana went on. "My name erased from official documents. I was reassigned to data analytics like a ghost in the system. No explanation, no closure, just Excel with a polite title." Major Cadding shifted again, uncomfortable but no longer dismissive. Even he couldn't deny the weight of what was being laid bare. "And still," Dana said, her voice rising with quiet conviction, "I stayed. I stayed because I believed the truth had value. Because if no one speaks, the silence becomes policy." She walked slowly along the front row, every eye in the room following her. This isn't just about a piece of equipment. It's about culture, accountability, the courage to tell hard truths in a place where decorum often demands silence. General Castillo, standing at the back with his arms crossed, gave a near imperceptible nod. Dana stopped before a schematic showing the electrical insulation updates, thicker cabling, rerouted circuits, reinforced nodes. "This," she said, tapping the diagram, "exists because someone spoke up, because someone said this isn't good enough. And now, every time a pilot ejects safely, every time a life is saved, that voice echoes. That scar matters." Her hand briefly grazed the burn mark on her wrist again. "You don't have to crash to change something," she added. "You just have to care enough to see what's broken before it breaks someone else." The door creaked quietly. A staff member entered with a clipboard, pausing at the edge, unsure whether to interrupt. Dana raised her hand gently, signaling for a moment longer. "Before I step down, I want to say this," she said, turning to the class one last time. "You will each carry a responsibility heavier than any jet you'll ever fly. Don't let procedure become a wall between you and the people you're sworn to protect. Challenge what's comfortable. Ask the inconvenient questions. And when you're told to let it go, remember someone once didn't, and because of that, someone else lived." The silence afterward was not empty. It was full of thought, of resolve, of the shifting weight of duty. General Castillo finally stepped forward, voice steady. "This ends the formal session," he announced, "but let it begin something greater. Lieutenant Colonel Rock, on behalf of this base, thank you for more than your service. Thank you for your honesty." Dana gave a small nod, then gathered her materials. The journalist, still quiet in the back, lowered his camera entirely, as if unsure how to frame what had just happened. The cadets slowly stood, still processing. Dana walked past them, her movements deliberate, each step a testament to the recovery they couldn't see. Outside, the tarmac shimmered beneath the Arizona sun. F-35s lined the field, their canopies glinting like dormant guardians. She paused near the threshold, casting one last look over her shoulder. The room still held the echoes of her story, but the silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt full of promise. Then she stepped into the sunlight, her scarred hand brushing the edge of her notes, her shadow trailing behind. Long, steady, and unflinching. Dana lifted her voice, calm but unwavering. The question lingered in the air. How had she survived the rejection, the marginalization, when she had so much to give? She answered with a quiet strength. By remembering why I ever took flight in the first place. Not for the accolades or recognition, but to safeguard those who would follow. I focused on what I could do behind the scenes. I poured myself into analyzing data, drafting reports, rewriting safety protocols. I became a silent guardian, working in the shadows for something bigger than myself. Major Brent Keating sat with his arms crossed, face unreadable, but his eyes held steady on Dana. He said nothing. It was General Castillo who spoke next. His voice dropped to a thoughtful murmur. Your story challenges us, all of us. It's a reminder that progress isn't seamless, and often our most important lessons rise out of failure. Dana nodded gently. That's exactly it. But failure only teaches us if we're brave enough to face it head on. She turned back to the screen and tapped a remote. A new slide flashed up. A complex, layered flowchart that outlined the revamped emergency ejection protocols in painstaking detail. She stepped closer, her voice now taking on a crisp, technical cadence. We've built in redundancies at every critical stage. Dual sensors now verify canopy clearance before launch. The ejection seat's timing system has been re-engineered to test against a full spectrum of failure scenarios. And we've overhauled emergency oxygen systems to support pilots even if they're unconscious mid-air. Beneath her clinical tone simmered a hard-earned resolve. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, it will always require human judgment, human vigilance. I was lucky. I survived. But not everyone has. A heavy silence settled over the briefing room. The weight of her words rippled outward, as if gravity itself had thickened. Then from the back, Cadet Mercer spoke. His voice, no longer brash or skeptical, had softened. Lieutenant Colonel, do you ever feel afraid stepping back into a cockpit? Dana's gaze drifted for a heartbeat, her features shadowed by a flicker of remembered pain. Then she met his eyes, voice unwavering. Every single day. But fear isn't the enemy. It's a tool. It reminds us what's at stake. It keeps us grounded in respect for the aircraft and for the mission. Her eyes swept the room, locking with each cadet in turn. If you feel no fear, you don't respect what you're flying, and without respect, you won't survive. General Castillo inclined his head, voice solemn but certain. Let that be your lesson today. Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means pressing forward despite it. The cadets were quiet, absorbing every word. Something in them had shifted. Dana's tone changed as she began to share the aftermath. She spoke of the long, excruciating months after the accident, the painful rehab, the haunting isolation of recovery, the humiliation of being ignored while her findings were shelved. She described the lonely nights poring over flight telemetry, tracking every anomaly, mapping each failure. She remembered colleagues who turned their backs and the aching sense of invisibility. But through it all, she held on, to purpose, to duty, to the belief that protecting future pilots mattered more than personal recognition. A low murmur of gratitude began to stir among the cadets, faint but rising. As the session came to a close, General Castillo rose, his posture erect, voice ringing clear. Today, we honor not just a pilot, but a pioneer. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Rock's efforts have saved lives and redefined the very foundation of the F-35 program. He turned to Dana, respect etched deeply across his face. Your legacy will become part of every pilot's training from this moment on. Dana smiled softly, her wrists, scarred but steady, rested gently on the table. I don't want gratitude, I want vigilance. Learn from the past. Prepare for what hasn't happened yet. The cadets filed out slowly, no longer the same. A few approached her directly, offering handshakes with silent reverence. Others bowed their heads as they passed, gestures of recognition deeper than words. Outside, the desert sun blazed fiercely over the tarmac. But within the four walls of that briefing room, something luminous had awakened. A fire lit not by combat or glory, but by truth, resilience, and lived experience. What had begun as a technical presentation had transformed into something more profound, a living testament to endurance and sacrifice, embodied in Dana Rock and the story written into every inch of her scarred skin. Even after the cadets were gone, whispers lingered. Hushed voices reflected on what they had witnessed. Truth delivered without embellishment. History carried in bone and blood. The Arizona sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across polished steel tables, as if to echo the depth of what had just occurred. General Castillo remained behind, seated and contemplative. His gaze remained fixed on the chair Dana had just vacated. In that stillness, her presence lingered. The sheer weight of what she had endured, the thin line between life and death at 30,000 feet, settled heavy in his thoughts. Then the door opened with a soft creak. A figure entered. A man older, silver-haired, with a face weathered by years of service and a kind of strength that didn't need to be announced. He carried a worn leather briefcase and wore a Lockheed Martin engineer's badge. Dana turned. Her voice was softer now, surprised and warm. Tom, I didn't think you'd come today. The man, Thomas Everett, audition, gave a nod and a smile that hinted at deep respect. I had to. You deserve to be seen and heard, Dana, not buried in some restricted file cabinet. He stepped forward and opened the case, revealing a stack of documents aged at the edges but carefully preserved. These are the original logs, the flight data, the engineering reports from the 2007 test flights. He laid them gently on the table. General Castillo raised his eyes, visibly moved. Mr. Everett, this is an honor. Thank you, General, Everett replied. If it hadn't been for Dana's courage and the data she fought to document, we never would have had the proof needed to push for a redesign. These reports show everything. The exact timeline of failure, the delay in canopy jettison, the electrical faults in the seat ejection system, the mistimed sequence that nearly cost her life. Dana leaned forward, tracing a diagram with her finger. Every detail I remembered, every inconsistency I flagged, it's all here. Everett's voice was steady, if tinged with old frustration. These documents were buried for years, hidden under bureaucratic layers. The leadership was afraid of losing funding, of tarnishing reputations. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. General Castillo steepled his hands, the weight of history sitting heavy in his chest. Your persistence ensured these lessons endured. What you went through, it's now a cornerstone of how we train and protect every pilot. Dana looked around the room, now mostly empty save for herself, Everett, and the general. Her voice was low but unwavering. It was never just about me. It's about every pilot who might one day face what I did. We owe them better. We owe them everything. Everett gave a quiet nod, and that fight still continues. Each new generation of technology brings new risk. But because of you, we've kept the human factor right where it belongs, at the center. Dana smiled again, barely. The scars we carry, they're not just reminders, they're warnings. Technology alone won't to keep us alive. At that moment, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The door opened and Cadet Ramirez stepped in, clutching a notebook to her chest, her eyes bright with resolve. Lieutenant Colonel Rock, she said respectfully, I wanted to thank you. Your story, it made me want to work harder, push further. Dana's eyes softened. Thank you, Rome. Don't lose that fire. That's how change begins. As the room settled, General Castillo gave a quiet nod, his eyes sweeping across the table with solemn affirmation. Sir, may I suggest we integrate Lieutenant Colonel Rock's experience and data into all upcoming training modules? One of the younger officers ventured. The general's smile came not as surprise, but as confirmation. This was already in motion. Today's briefing had merely laid the foundation. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the base in a golden hue, warm and almost forgiving. Dinah Rock stood by the window, silent. A calm sense of closure swept over her. Not an ending, but an acknowledgement. The pain, the silence she had once carried in like armor, and the relentless perseverance that had defined her path. None of it was in vain anymore. Her journey had stepped from the shadows and into the light, becoming something more than personal. It had become a guidepost for the future. Before dawn broke fully over Luke Air Force Base, Dana walked alone through the quiet corridors. The air still carried the weight of yesterday's revelations. Echoes of the briefing lingered, like ghosts clinging to the metal and glass. She could still see the way the cadets' expressions shifted, how they sat straighter, more present, as her story unfolded. Outwardly, she had been heard, but inside her, a storm still raged. The scar on her wrist, once just a physical reminder of an F-35 ejection gone wrong, was now more than that. It was truth carved into flesh, a reminder of the steep cost of honesty in a world where protocol too often buried the real stories. She paused in front of a glass display case in the hallway. Behind it, time stood still. Faded portraits of pilots, medals, ribbons, names etched on plaques, memorials to sacrifice. Her reflection hovered ghost-like over them, as though she were part of both the past and the future. How many of these heroes, she wondered, had suffered in silence like she had? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Colonel Rock. She turned. General Castillo stood a few feet away, his usually firm face softened by something unspoken. Respect, perhaps even understanding. "May I walk with you?" he asked gently. Together they moved toward the runway. The sky was just beginning to glow and rows of fighter jets sat like sentinels in the pale morning light. "I wanted to thank you," Castillo said, his voice low, unpracticed in sentiment, "for reminding us what it truly means to serve." Dana gave a slight nod. She wasn't one for thanks, but she recognized the weight of the moment. The sincerity in his tone was rare, authentic. "The progress we've made, it's because of your persistence," he continued. "But I get the feeling your battle isn't over yet." She exhaled, long and slow. "No, General, it's not. We've made improvements, sure. But the shadows, they're still there. The people hiding behind procedure and red tape, they haven't gone anywhere. The hardest fight is changing the mindset, not the machinery." Their conversation was abruptly cut by the thunder of an F-35 screaming down the runway, then lifting into the sky with fluid precision. They both watched it climb, silver and fearless, an echo of everything Dana had endured to make flights like that one safer. Later that day, Dana stood quietly in the flight simulators. Around her, young cadets buzzed with nervous energy and intense focus. The room hummed with anticipation as they ran through combat exercises and simulated failures. She watched, noting not just their technique but their eyes, the ones full of promise, but still blind to the deeper truths. A nervous cadet hesitated in a stealth simulation, his hand trembling on the throttle. Dana stepped in, her voice firm but kind. "Respect the aircraft," she said. Then after a beat, "Respect the unknown." The words settled over the room like gravity, not just advice, but a lived creed. Throughout the day, Dana met with instructors and flight officers, urging them to push beyond the surface-level curriculum. She spoke of vulnerability, not as weakness, but as strength. She insisted they talk openly about failure, about fear, about what it meant to survive and still want to fly again. In another room surrounded by engineers and flight safety analysts, Dana reviewed telemetry logs, black box transcripts, near-miss reports. Her commentary was clinical, but grounded in pain. Every protocol she proposed had a story behind it, hers or someone else's who never got to speak. At night she worked late, combing through reports, penning detailed recommendations. It was quiet work, thankless work, but she did it with the same fire that had once lifted her into the sky. Still, even amid progress, the loneliness crept in. Some wounds, long buried, began to ache again. She remembered the times she had been silenced, dismissed, doubted. The pain of being labeled a liability, the cruel mutterings behind closed doors. But she had learned long ago that resilience was not about healing fast. It was about refusing to break again and again. One afternoon, Cadet Ramirez approached her after class. His face held both awe and sincerity. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said quietly, "your story, it changed me. I don't just want to fly. I want to protect the ones who come after me." Dana's heart tightened with pride. She smiled, slow and full. "Then you carry the torch," she told him. "That's how change begins." In the weeks that followed, Dana became a constant presence at the base. People no longer looked away from the scar on her wrist. Instead, they saw in it the symbol of a survivor who refused to be silent. The cadets who trained under her learned more than flight maneuvers. They absorbed lessons about humility, integrity, and courage. About truth. Her battle wasn't finished. There would be more meetings, more pushback, more scars, some visible, others not. But the shadows were thinning. In their place, a legacy was rising, not one of machines or metals, but one that would outlive her and protect them all. Cadet Ramirez sat still, her posture quiet but her mind sharply alert, absorbing every syllable as though it were being etched into her memory. That moment, listening intently while others debated, questioned, and reflected, would later come to define a profound turning point for her, not just for the flight program she was part of, but for how she understood leadership, accountability, and the unseen weight of choices made under pressure. Throughout the rest of the day, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Rock moved steadily through the base, consulting with engineers, instructors, and mental health professionals. Her presence wasn't just symbolic, it was intentional, strategic. She wasn't there to inspire from a distance, she was shaping change from within. Her philosophy was holistic, rejecting the outdated binary of physical readiness alone. Dana championed a broader approach: mental resilience, situational awareness, and the courage to speak truthfully, even when it was uncomfortable. Inside the simulation lab, she observed a cadet undergoing a high-stakes training scenario. It was a drill crafted to mirror the disorienting chaos of an emergency ejection. The cadet's hands trembled slightly on the controls, sweat beaded at his brow. The air felt thick with the strain of performance. Dana didn't raise her voice. Her feedback came low and even, calm, threading through every word. "Trust your training," she said, voice firm but compassionate. "But just as important, trust yourself. The cockpit is unforgiving, yes, but fear doesn't have to freeze you. You have more control than you think, even when everything feels like it's falling apart." Outside, the desert sun blazed across the runway, scorching the earth with its usual indifference. But inside those walls, another kind of heat simmered, a collective urgency, a hunger to evolve. This wasn't just training anymore. It was a quiet rebellion against complacency. A vow to the pilots who hadn't survived that their losses wouldn't be in vain. That evening, after most of the base had quieted down, Dana found herself alone in the flight data room. The fatigue behind her eyes was undeniable, but she kept reading. She moved through the logs from a recent mission, her focus razor sharp. One detail made her pause: a delay in the canopy release sequence during what should have been a routine ejection sim. It was slight, nearly imperceptible. But Dana had learned through pain and scars that small details in flight could mean the difference between life and death. She flagged the anomaly and, without hesitation, assembled the engineering team. In a late-night session lit by monitor glow and tension, they combed through the data together. Line by line, they discovered a software glitch, subtle, elusive, undetected by previous rounds of testing. The realization was sobering and reaffirming all at once. This was exactly why Dana's vigilance mattered, why every inch of improvement was worth the fight. Weeks passed, then months. Dana's influence, once seen as an outlier's presence at Luke Air Force Base, began to ripple outward. Her reports circulated through Air Force command chains. Her proposals, once debated, started forming the framework for new training protocols, safety reviews, and mental health initiatives. She had become a catalyst for transformation. But none of it dulled the memory of 2007. Her scar was more than a mark. It was a silent companion, a daily reminder of what she had survived and what she now owed. Each time she caught herself growing tired or disheartened, that scar brought her back to purpose. One afternoon, a message came in from Thomas Everett, the seasoned Lockheed Martin engineer, whose quiet support had proven vital in her fight for reforms. He was inviting her to a private briefing, something classified, a next-generation ejection seat prototype. Dana accepted with cautious optimism. She understood that innovation required daring, but it also demanded reflection, especially from those who had seen what failure could cost. The Lockheed Martin research facility was sterile and modern, humming with the low drone of power systems and the cold clarity of polished steel. Digital screens bathed the room in shifting light as schematics cycled in and out of focus. At the center of it all stood the prototype, sleek, complex, full of promise and potential risk. Thomas stood beside her, gesturing toward the integrated systems with a measured pride. "This is years of data, Dana, much of it thanks to your contributions. We've built in redundant fail-safes, enhanced the sensor arrays, and completely redesigned the canopy release to respond to dynamic in-flight variables." Dana studied it intently. "It's an achievement," she acknowledged, "but its real worth won't show in here. It'll show when something goes wrong, and it will. Systems don't always follow the script." Everett gave a faint smile. "Exactly, that's why we need your insight. You've faced what the rest of us only theorize." They moved to the simulation console. Scenarios played out on high-definition displays. Engine fires, mid-air stalls, sudden loss of altitude. The prototype reacted in real time, highlighting points of tension and triggering autocorrective actions. Dana scrutinized every response. She gave immediate, grounded feedback, pointing out vulnerabilities no machine could anticipate, but every pilot feared. Her suggestions sparked debate. Some engineers resisted at first, but her credibility, forged in both data and pain, was undeniable. She challenged them to go further, to think beyond the algorithm. Back at Luke, word of Dana's collaboration with Lockheed Martin traveled quickly. Among the cadets, her influence had become something personal. Cadet Ramirez, emboldened by Dana's persistence and courage, took the lead in organizing a mentorship initiative. Its goal wasn't just technical, it was emotional. It prioritized resilience, connection, and truth-telling. It gave space to stories of failure, recovery, and perseverance. And most importantly, it allowed cadets to be human in a system that often demanded they be machines. Walls began to crumble, walls of silence, of shame, of pretending everything was fine. Dana's fight for change wasn't just playing out in boardrooms or hangars. It was unfolding in real conversations between young pilots determined to do better for each other. Still within the military structure, not everyone welcomed the shifts. Dana's push for transparency and reform rattled old hierarchies. Some commanders backed her wholeheartedly. Others resisted, fearing destabilization of rigid protocols. But Dana had long stopped seeking unanimous approval. Her focus stayed sharp. Her resolve was carved by fire. One afternoon, during a critical simulation drill, Dana witnessed a cadet fumble an emergency ejection sequence. The error was minor on screen, but in a real aircraft it could have been fatal. She stepped in without hesitation. Calm, direct. She walked him through the proper sequence, guiding his hands, his breath, his focus. Afterward, she assembled the group. Her voice didn't scold, it taught. "Simulators are where mistakes become lessons," she said, "and mistakes will happen. That's a certainty. What matters is what you do next. That's what survival looks like." Her words struck deep. Over time, the collective effort, hers, Everett's, Ramirez's, and those who dared to back them, bore visible fruit. New ejection training modules were implemented across multiple Air Force bases. Pilots received not only mechanical instruction, but psychological support. Programs were introduced to help them navigate trauma, recover from fear, and build resilience without shame. Dana never let the accolades distract her. She kept her routines humble and deliberate. She still visited the memorial wall, still read names, still remembered faces, still whispered silent promises to those who no longer flew. What was once buried in secrecy and silence had become something luminous. Dana Rock's journey, rooted in pain, tempered by integrity, was now guiding others toward clearer skies. It was a reminder etched in steel and scar tissue that behind every aircraft roared a human soul, and every soul deserved a fighting chance to come home. That morning at Luke Air Force Base, the sky was an unbroken stretch of blue, crisp and endless above the desert horizon. The wind carried the scent of scorched earth and jet fuel, sharp, metallic, and familiar. Dana stood at the edge of the runway, watching as an F-35 lifted into the air with impossible grace. She held her breath for a moment, eyes tracing the silhouette as it disappeared into the sky. This was her moment of reckoning and reverence, repeating every time a bird took flight. The plane represented the triumph of engineering, yes, but for her, it also held the ghost of everything she had lost and gained. Her wrist ached faintly beneath her sleeve. The scar, as always, remained quiet, present, waiting. As Dana turned away, ready to continue her day, she caught sight of a familiar group of cadets heading her way. Leading them was Cadet Ramirez, her face alight with determination, her steps purposeful. "Lieutenant Colonel," Ramirez called out, her voice steady even though she still sometimes felt nervous around Dana. "We're ready for the mentorship session." Dana gave a small, encouraging nod and smiled. "Good, let's make it count." Inside the briefing room, the air was thick with anticipation. The mentorship program, something Dana had helped breathe life into, had quickly evolved into a core part of the training regimen. It had become a trusted space, where cadets could be vulnerable without judgment, ask difficult questions, and absorb the hard-earned lessons of those who had flown before them. Dana opened the session with the kind of honesty that didn't hide behind formality. She shared pieces of her own story, moments of self-doubt, near-death experiences, the ceaseless drive for mastery that defined life in the cockpit. Her voice didn't tremble or boast. It cut straight through the usual bravado cadets wore like armor. It reached the places beneath. One cadet, a young woman named Harris, hesitated before raising her hand. "How do you handle the fear before a mission?" she asked softly. "The possibility that something might go terribly wrong?" Dana looked her squarely in the eye. "Fear is natural. It's not your enemy. It's a signal. When I feel it rising, I focus on preparation, knowing my equipment, trusting the hours of training behind me, and grounding myself in the reason I chose to fly." Courage doesn't mean not feeling afraid. It means acting anyway, even when you do. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thoughtful, charged. Her words didn't just settle in their ears, they landed in their bones. After the session, Dana moved on to the simulation lab, where cadets were fully immersed in complex flight scenarios. Stress tests designed to replicate the unpredictable nature of real missions. She watched each session carefully, stepping in to guide when needed, offering corrections when mistakes surfaced, reinforcing the resilience needed to survive in the sky. Her presence served as a constant reminder that the cockpit left no room for error. The difference between life and death could be a single breath, a single decision. Later that day, she joined a team of engineers and safety officers to comb through data from recent training exercises. As the reports streamed across the screen, Dana's sharp eyes caught something subtle: slight deviations in the ejection timing sequences. They weren't immediately dangerous, but to her, they were red flags, echoes of her own near-fatal experience. She didn't hesitate. She called for a full investigation and immediate corrective action, her voice steady but urgent. She reminded them, small oversights grow into tragedies when ignored. Her vigilance helped spur refinements to the ejection systems and adjustments to procedural protocols, tightening the net around pilot safety. Not long after, an unexpected invitation arrived. Dana was asked to speak at a military leadership conference. It would be a rare opportunity to share her message far beyond the boundaries of Luke Air Force Base. Weeks later, she stood before a packed auditorium. Faces filled every seat, senior officers and young cadets alike. Dana took a breath and began to tell her story. From the searing heat of the failed ejection to her climb through the ranks, from years of silence to her transformation into an outspoken advocate. Her message was unwavering. Transparency, resilience, and the human spirit must guide the future of military aviation. The response was overwhelming. Standing ovations, silent tears. In that moment, she knew the message had landed. Back at base, Dana returned with renewed conviction. The journey was still uphill, but the progress was undeniable. Every reform, every conversation, every cadet who found the courage to speak out, it all mattered. As she prepared for yet another full day of mentoring, analysis, and advocacy, her eyes fell on the scar that circled her wrist, a physical reminder of the day her life changed forever. Once a mark of trauma, it had become something else entirely, a symbol of survival, of purpose, of her unyielding commitment to the safety of every pilot who would follow in her wake. In the weeks after her appearance at the leadership conference, the Air Force community began to shift. Her story, once confined to a whisper among insiders, had sparked broader conversations. More voices joined in demanding greater transparency and safer practices. But with that recognition came heavier burdens, pushback from bureaucracy, political resistance, and the emotional cost of carrying the weight of reform. At Luke Air Force Base, Dana's days remained packed. She split her time between mentoring cadets, collaborating with engineers, and maneuvering through the complex tangle of military administration. Every day presented a new kind of challenge, some technical, others deeply human. One afternoon, Dana was summoned to a meeting with the new base commander, Colonel Whitman. Known for his no-nonsense, pragmatic approach, he was a man respected for getting things done. As Dana entered, he motioned to the seat across from him. "Lieutenant Colonel Rock," he began, his tone steady but direct. "Your contributions here have been invaluable. However, there's concern that the pace of your reforms is causing disruption to established protocols." Dana met his eyes, unflinching. "Colonel, progress always disrupts the status quo. But if the lives of pilots are at stake, then disruption is necessary. Complacency kills." Whitman sighed, rubbing a hand across his chin. "I respect your conviction, but I have to consider operational readiness. We can't afford delays in deployment or training cycles." The tension was palpable, an old dance between tradition and innovation. One Dana had learned to navigate with persistence, never backing down, but always pushing forward. Later that afternoon, she returned to the training grounds. Cadet Ramirez greeted her with a report in hand and a spark of pride in her voice. "Lieutenant Colonel, the program's working," she said. "The cadets are more open now. They're talking about their mistakes. They're learning from each other. It's building something real, a culture of resilience." Dana smiled. "That's what we need. Pilots who don't just survive, but grow stronger through the struggle." That evening, Dana reviewed data from a new series of flight simulations. Subtle patterns emerged, minor inconsistencies in emergency protocol execution under extreme stress. She flagged the anomalies immediately and began coordinating with the safety team to address them head-on. In the quieter moments, when the base quieted and the stars reclaimed the sky, Dana would reflect on the pain, the setbacks, the doubts that never fully disappeared. But always her gaze would return to that scar. It would remind her this wasn't about one pilot. It was about every life touched by the work she had committed herself to. And so, as dawn broke once more over Luke Air Force Base, painting the tarmac in golden light and filling the sky with the rising hum of engines, Dana stood ready. Another day, another chance to lead, to teach, to protect. Her purpose was steady, her fight unshaken. In the operations center, she gathered her team, flight instructors, engineers, mental health professionals, and safety officers. The goal for the day was clear: finalize the integration of the revised safety protocols, embedding the hard-won lessons of experience into every layer of training. She stood at the front of the room, calm but resolute. "Today marks an important step," Dana began. "Our mission isn't just to produce pilots who can fly. It's to forge aviators who are equipped for the unknown, who can adapt, endure, and make decisions when everything's on the line. We're building something bigger than training. We're building resilience into the heart of what we do." Heads nodded across the room. And as the meeting moved forward, so did the mission, steadily, purposefully, under the quiet leadership of a woman who had walked through fire and come back stronger. His latest reflections from training. His voice carried a mix of nervous excitement and sincere admiration. "Ma'am, I used to think being a great pilot meant mastering every control, reacting fast, never hesitating. But after the resilience drills and listening to what you've shared, I realize strength also means knowing when to pause, breathe, and ask for help. Dana smiled at that. You've just learned something many officers take years to understand. Ramirez looked down for a moment, then back up. I want to help others the way you helped us. Maybe mentor the newer cadets, if that's okay. More than okay, Dana replied warmly. It's necessary. That afternoon, she stood once again inside the flight simulator bay. Cadet Mercer, once the most dismissive of her presence, now volunteered for the most difficult run of the day, a simulated bird strike at high altitude with failing hydraulics. Dana watched quietly, arms crossed. Mercer's hands trembled slightly at first, but his breathing steadied. When the strike occurred, he didn't panic. He followed emergency protocols by the book. As the simulated aircraft landed safely, applause erupted from the instructors nearby. After the session, Mercer approached her. "Lieutenant Colonel Rock," he said, his voice respectful. "I used to think your scar was a warning. Now I see it's a symbol of what we're fighting to improve." Dana looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "Thank you, Mercer. That means more than you know." In the evenings, long after the sun dipped beneath the Arizona desert, Dana remained at her desk. Reports scattered across her workspace, some technical, others psychological, many deeply personal. She had made it a point to include anonymized testimony from cadets and active pilots in her reform proposals, letting their voices guide the future of training. No chart or metric could fully convey what it meant to relive a malfunction at night, to wake up drenched in sweat, to question your worth after surviving what others hadn't. Across the base, a quiet cultural shift was underway. The once silent corridors of the mental health wing now echoed with laughter and conversation. Pilot families were invited to information sessions on trauma support. Flight engineers coordinated directly with instructors, closing the gap between theory and experience. General Castillo monitored these changes closely, quietly backing Dana's vision in meetings that required diplomacy and political finesse. One evening, as a desert wind whispered against the chain-link fences of the base, Dana found herself in the hangar alone, staring at a grounded jet. The hum of distant machinery faded as her thoughts drifted. She saw the image of her younger self, fiery, reckless, full of pride, strapped into a cockpit seconds before it failed her. The memory was sharp, but no longer unbearable. She placed a hand over the scar on her wrist, feeling not just the pain it had once held, but the weight of all that had followed. It had taken years, countless battles, some internal, some with a system slow to change. But here she stood, still flying in her own way. By week's end, Dana stood before a newly arrived group of cadets. They sat in perfect rows, crisp uniforms, curious eyes. Behind her, projected on a large screen, was a simple phrase in bold letters: "Shrink through truth." She began, her voice steady and sure. "You're here to become aviators, protectors of the skies. But what I hope you carry forward is this: bravery isn't just about what you do in the cockpit. It's how you respond to fear, how you face failure, and how you support those around you when they're at their weakest." She paused, scanning the faces before her. The sky doesn't forgive mistakes, but it also doesn't reward arrogance. Learn to trust your team, trust your training, and most importantly, take care of your mind as fiercely as you care for your machine. The room was silent for a long beat before a wave of nods spread through the cadets. She stepped down, leaving them to reflect. Outside, dawn broke over the desert, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Dana Rock walked alone toward the operations wing, her boots crunching lightly against the gravel. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. There were still systems to fix, cadets to guide, and barriers to tear down. But for the first time in years, the burden didn't feel quite so heavy. Her story wasn't the loudest or the most celebrated, but it was real, unflinching, and undeniably hers. And that was enough to keep going. The mentorship program had evolved far beyond its humble beginnings. Once a tentative pilot initiative, it had now become a vital part of the culture at Luke Air Force Base. The cadets had begun to open up, not just about their triumphs, but also about their fears, their failures, and their doubts. Vulnerability was no longer a liability. It had become a step toward mastery. Ramirez smiled, the light in his eyes reflecting the quiet confidence of a man who believed in what they were building. "We're creating a community that supports, not judges," he said. Danarak stood beside him, a deep warmth stirring in her chest. This was the future she had longed to see. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the base held a solemn ceremony, a tribute to the pilots who had made extraordinary sacrifices. Dana stood at attention next to General Castallo, watching the medals being pinned, the commendations read aloud. The names echoed like whispers from a battlefield, each one a reminder of the steep cost behind every mission flown. The moment was heavy, reverent. The weight of memory settled on her like the nightfall itself. When the last award had been given and the crowd dispersed, Dana quietly made her way toward the flight line. Alone beneath a sky lit with stars, she felt the presence of every pilot who had ever taken to the air and never returned. She paused, raising her wrist and gently tracing the scar that ran across it. A faded line of trauma, but also a declaration. It didn't just mark what she had survived. It marked a promise. To all those who flew, to those who trained, to those who might one day face what she had, she would not stop fighting for their safety. There was still so much to do, but progress had taken root, and with each flight, each briefing, each hard-won lesson, Dana could feel the path becoming clearer. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something that would outlast her. Inside the briefing room at Luke, the air was quiet, almost deceptively so, unlike the storm churning inside Dana's mind. The stories she'd shared, the experiences she'd laid bare over the previous months, had shaken the foundations of tradition. Change was coming, but change never arrived without friction. The battles had shifted from the cockpit to the corridors of bureaucracy, and Dana now sat at the head of the table, her scarred wrist resting on the gleaming wood, surrounded by young officers who had grown up in the culture she was fighting to reform. This was not a meeting about tactics or technology. It was a confrontation with legacy. General Castillo began, "We've made progress, but challenges remain. Transparency and pilot welfare are gaining traction, but not without pushback. Certain command structures are resisting reform." Dana's voice was calm but firm. That resistance isn't just about preserving structure. It's fear. Fear of admitting flaws, fear of owning hard truths. One colonel interjected, his tone clipped. "We must preserve discipline. Rapid change can compromise readiness." Dana didn't flinch. Discipline is not silence, and order does not require complacency. The room grew tense but respectful. Dana insisted on actionable reforms, embedding new lessons into training manuals, reshaping how reporting systems worked, advocating for a culture built on truth, not punishment. She was planting roots where only rituals had once stood. Later that week, she sat with a small group of cadets, sharing not tactics but wisdom. Leadership, she told them, means standing your ground when silence would be easier. It means protecting your people by telling the truth, even when it shakes the system. They listened, really listened. And in the weeks that followed, Dana saw the change taking hold. Of course, progress had its price. Budget restrictions delayed safety updates. Senior officers cast doubts on the necessity of some of her proposed changes. But Dana pressed on. She built alliances where she could, within the military, across agencies, even with civilian contractors like Thomas Everett at Lockheed. Data and testimony became her arsenal. Eventually, her campaign brought her to a national review panel convened to assess pilot safety programs. She stood before senior officials, engineers, and psychologists, not to lecture, but to lay bare the stakes. Our pilots deserve more than speeches. They deserve transparency. They deserve systems that accept the reality of human vulnerability. Ignoring that doesn't make us stronger. It kills us. Her words cut through the politics. By the end of her testimony, the room had changed. So had the panel's recommendations. When the reforms were officially adopted, Dana allowed herself the smallest breath of hope. There was a long way to go, but now the foundation was no longer theoretical. It was real. At Luke, the ripple effects were visible. Cadets trained with sharper focus. Instructors embraced introspection. Dana watched it unfold, the legacy she'd fought so long for, etched not in policy but in the behavior of those who would fly after her. Her scar no longer just a reminder, it was a signal, a lighthouse for others navigating storms. The review panel's momentum breathed new life into the base's initiatives. Dana's mission had gone from solitary resistance to institutional transformation. Luke Air Force Base was no longer just an installation. It was becoming a proving ground for what the future of flight safety could be. One quiet afternoon, her phone rang. General Castillo's voice was low but steady. "Dana, we've got a problem. Overseas deployments, combat zones, are exposing gaps in emergency protocols. The stress responses, the systems, they're failing under fire. We need you there on the ground." She didn't hesitate. Within days, Dana was en route to the forward operating base. The environment was unforgiving. Pilots rotated constantly through high-risk missions, their lives hanging on seconds and decisions. Every movement counted, every protocol mattered. Dana went straight to work, meeting with flight safety officers, delivering hands-on workshops, revising combat-specific emergency procedures. She wasn't just an advisor, she was a presence. She shared her story, yes, but she also listened. She observed. And then she reworked the curriculum to reflect the brutal reality outside of simulation rooms. Young pilots, some barely old enough to remember her accident, hung on to her words. She had survived what many of them feared most. Her voice mattered. She formed strong ties with medical staff as well, integrating mental health protocols into mission planning. War didn't only attack the body, it wore down the mind. Dana made sure both were protected. It wasn't easy. Equipment failed. Stress frayed nerves. Combat didn't care about policy. But with each hurdle, Dana adjusted, adapted, and documented. Every failure became a blueprint for change. Back at Luke, cadets tracked her journey. During one video call, Cadet Ramirez leaned into the screen and asked what they all wondered. "What keeps you going, Lieutenant Colonel?" Dana didn't pause, because every time we learn something, every time we make something safer, we save lives. That's the only thing that matters. When her deployment ended, she returned to Luke to a hero's welcome. But for Dana, it wasn't about applause. It was about seeing a base transformed. Instructors more alert, systems more intelligent, pilots more prepared. Her work had become a living legacy, carried in flight checklists, in safety manuals, in the confidence behind each takeoff. And though the skies remained uncertain, the path ahead, cut through storm and silence, was now visible. It bore her mark: courage, truth, relentless resolve. Years of endurance, of pain transformed into purpose, had led her here, to this turning point where her voice could genuinely alter the trajectory of the Air Force. Today wasn't just another talk. It was a culmination, a symposium unlike any she'd experienced before. Its focus was deliberate, weaving resilience, transparency, and human-centered safety into the very DNA of pilot training and command structures. As rows of officers and instructors filed into the room and took their seats, Dana Rock stood steady, her posture calm but charged with intent. Beneath her composed exterior stirred a familiar tension, part anticipation, part unwavering resolve. Around her sat a living cross-section of the institution. Seasoned commanders, hungry cadets, and policymakers, all of them players in the shifting landscape she had helped to set in motion. When she began to speak, her words came not as orders or formal remarks, but as reflections shaped by lived experience. "Flight," she said softly, "is an act of trust. Trust in your machine, in your team, and above all, in yourself. But trust, it's delicate, and it demands trust, courage, the willingness to face and admit failure." Every eye in the room locked on her as she revisited her own story, not merely retelling history, but breathing life into it. The searing explosion of the ejection, the abrupt end to her flying career. The scar on her wrist, yes, but also the deeper wounds, the silence, the marginalization. And then the long road she walked to drag truth into the light, to challenge the silence that had swallowed so many others before her. Her voice didn't shake. It rang clear, driven not by bitterness, but by conviction. This wasn't about vindication, it was about collective responsibility. "We cannot afford to bury our failures," she said. We must confront them, learn from them, adapt. That's how we evolve, not by hiding our scars, but by understanding what they mean. What followed wasn't passive listening. The room shifted. Officers opened up. One by one, they recounted their own near misses, their own misjudgments, failures that had once seemed unspeakable. The air felt different. Pride gave way to something deeper. Vulnerability paired with growth. One moment stood out. A young instructor, his voice tight with emotion, confessed to a training accident that had nearly cost a life. His voice cracked when he described the shame, but also the strange liberation that transparency had brought. Donna met his gaze, nodded once and said, "Leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about being real. It's about showing up with honesty." Later, she pored over training modules, fine-tuning them with surgical precision. Each change carried weight. Real-world case studies were no longer sidelined. They were front and center. Mental health strategies were integrated, not as afterthoughts, but as foundational tools. Simulated drills now demanded crisis decision-making, grounded in authentic experience, not mechanical repetition. There was movement, subtle but unmistakable. At the end of the day, as the room began to empty, General Raymond Castillo approached her. The sincerity in his tone mirrored the respect in his eyes. "Your leadership is reshaping this institution," he said. "The seeds you've planted, this culture, you've given it roots. It'll outlast all of us." Dana smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet gratitude. "It's not mine alone," she said. "We're doing this together. One pilot at a time. One lesson at a time." Outside, the desert stretched wide, the sun dipping low across the base in a blaze of orange and crimson. Long shadows crawled across the tarmac as twilight rolled in, a metaphor for the young, ongoing journey ahead. Standing in the gathering dusk, Dana allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The day had been powerful, not perfect, not complete, but honest. And that honesty was a force, slow, sometimes resisted, but inevitable when it burned with truth. Her thoughts traveled back to those first nights after the ejection. The sleepless hours, the solitude, the physical and invisible scars. There had been days when she thought it might all break her. Now those same memories had become something else, a compass for others. What began as survival had become transformation. She no longer stood on the margins. She was a voice at the center, shaping doctrine, championing reform. The pain hadn't disappeared. Neither had the responsibility. But the difference now was that others carried it with her. Every shared story, every policy adjusted, was another step forward. That evening, as she returned to her quarters, her comms unit chimed softly. A message from Cadet Ramirez, short, honest, and unforgettable. "Thank you for showing us that strength isn't just found in the skies, but in the courage to speak, in the refusal to be silent." Dana stared at the words for a long moment, then smiled, genuinely. These were the moments that fortified her, the ones that reminded her that change, while not always visible, was real, and it was taking root. In the following weeks, the revised modules were deployed across bases nationwide. They weren't just technical updates. They were a new standard: resilience training, mental health integration, case-based learning, and revamped emergency procedures. She didn't just supervise, she collaborated. She partnered with instructors to ensure the training evolved as pilots did. She pushed for mentorship frameworks, for peer-led support, for open circles where rank and shame were left at the door. Pilots talked, they listened, they changed. Her work extended beyond the wire. Dana sat in think tanks with aerospace engineers. She testified before committees. She met with veterans groups, building a network that stretched from cockpit to Congress. Every conversation was stitched into a larger tapestry of safer flight. During a visit to a training facility, she met Lieutenant Harper, a young pilot, earnest but visibly tense. His confidence teetered beneath the weight of expectation. "There are days," he admitted quietly, "when the fear feels like it's going to drown me." Dana placed a reassuring hand on the edge of the table between them. "Fear is a signal," she said gently. "It tells you where to focus. It doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. The trick is to listen to it, but not let it own you. She taught him grounding exercises, breath control, and visualization techniques, tools honed from hard-won experience. Harper exhaled, shoulders softening. "Thank you," he murmured. "Really, that helps." Time passed, but her legacy deepened. Pilots who emerged from her programs weren't just proficient. They were advocates, carrying her message into every flight room, every mission brief. Her wrist scar remained, no longer just a wound, but a symbol, a mark of resilience, a warning, and a beacon. Years later, she stood again by the runway, watching a squadron rise into the brilliant sky. Risk still lived in every flight, but now so did preparedness, awareness, and care. Her own journey had begun with fire, but it had forged more than survival. It had sparked a legacy, one destined to fly farther than she ever had. Morning light filtered into the operations center at Luke Air Force Base. Dana sat quietly at her desk, letting the silence settle around her. The chapters behind her, the ones scarred by silence and determination, had led to this new dawn. The culture was changing, and she had helped write the blueprint. The door opened. Cadet Ramirez stepped in, her expression full of purpose. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, "the mentorship program, 3 more bases have joined. The feedback is amazing." Dana's face warmed with pride. "That's the kind of momentum that changes everything," she replied. Before the moment could stretch, General Castillo arrived, an official document in hand. His face was serious, but there was something unmistakable in his eyes. "Donna," he said, voice even but full of meaning, "the Air Force has formally recognized your contributions. The meritorious." The announcement of the service medal drew a wave of quiet applause across the room. Dana stood still, emotions rising inside her in layers. Pride, humility, and the ache of every battle that had led to this moment. "It's an honor," she said softly, her voice calm yet weighted with meaning. "But the real achievement is the progress we've made together." And she meant it. In the weeks that followed, Dana found herself at the center of a whirlwind of high-level meetings, working side by side with senior military leaders, policy architects, and top aerospace engineers. Her voice, once doubted by many, now shaped discussions that would redefine pilot safety and training for generations to come. Yet for all the policy shifts and technological reforms, she never stepped away from what mattered most: people, cadets, young pilots, the future. She continued mentoring them one-on-one, sharing hard-won truths about leadership, survival, and vulnerability. During those conversations, her wrist, scarred and exposed, often became the unspoken centerpiece. The physical mark of a past trauma, yes, but also a badge of resilience, a sign that she had endured and grown. One evening, after an especially intense training session, Dana found herself alone on the edge of the flight line. The sun was sinking beyond the horizon, turning the Arizona sky into a canvas of molten orange and deep violet. Far across the runway, a squadron of F-35s roared into the air, their dark silhouettes slashing across the twilight. Dana watched in silence. Her thoughts traveled far, past the control towers, over the mountains, through time itself, drifting toward the pilots who had once flown these skies, and those who someday would. A quiet peace crept over her. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of hidden turbulence and challenges yet to come. But the legacy she had built, layer by layer, scar by scar, stood tall. It was not just hers. It belonged to all who had dared to tell the truth, to question what was broken, to imagine something better. Under the broad desert night sky, Luke Air Force Base continued its quiet rhythm of life. Dana remained there for a while, her gaze trailing the last shimmer of a departing jet. It vanished into the dark, leaving behind a streak of light that faded slowly, just like the trail she had forged through a career marked by fire, courage, and unrelenting hope. The floodlights cast a soft, diffuse glow across her wrist, illuminating the scar in full. It was not just a reminder of the ejection that nearly killed her. It was a map of every battle she had fought since. The slow, grinding wars against silence, resistance, and bureaucratic delay. In the days that followed, letters began pouring in from across the country. Pilots she had never met wrote to her, sharing their own stories. Some revealed scars, visible or not, shaped by their own brushes with fear, failure, and survival. Veterans, many long retired, expressed their gratitude for the shift Dana had helped spark, a shift toward honesty, vulnerability, and healing. Of course, not every moment was filled with hope. Dana still faced pushback. The machinery of the military moved slowly, and many clung tightly to tradition, afraid of the disruption change could bring. But she never let herself waver. Instead, she drew strength from the people around her. Cadets like Ramirez who craved transparency, leaders like General Castillo who championed her message, and engineers who stepped forward with classified data to back her up. With them, she pushed harder, broke old molds, and ensured the conversation never stopped. One afternoon, Dana stood beneath a clear sky at a special ceremony. A new pilot training center was being dedicated in honor of those who had cleared the path before her. Among the names etched into the bronze plaque, hers was there. Subtle, not spotlighted, but undeniable. It was a quiet validation of all she had endured. When she stepped forward to speak, her voice held steady. "This center," she said, "is more than a place to train. It's a promise, a commitment to resilience, to bravery, and to never forgetting the lessons that came at such a high cost." Her words rippled through the crowd. They understood. They had felt the cost too. As the ceremony ended, Dana stepped outside into the dry, endless dusk. The wind whispered across her face, soft but certain. Above her, stars had begun to scatter across the heavens. Bright, countless, eternal. She thought of the cadets who would one day train within those walls. Thought of the skies they'd fly, the risks they'd take, the truths they'd carry forward. Her journey, from a violent ejection to a quiet revolution, was now stitched into the very fabric of those future stories. The sky remained vast. The unknown still loomed. But so did hope. Later that night, a small gathering formed at the base to honor the growing legacy of pilot safety, a culture Dana had helped build brick by brick. Inside the hangar-turned hall, people traded stories, some loud and laughing, others solemn and reflective. There was an undeniable spirit in the room, one of shared mission. When General Castillo raised a glass, the hall fell silent. "To those who dare to face the truth," he said, "who turn their scars into strength, and who guide us to safer skies." The toast met warm applause, not just polite, but earned, deep and real. Later, Dana slipped away for a moment alone. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The weight of the years, of every step, setback, and breakthrough, settled into her chest like a stone. But this time it felt light, balanced, resolved. She thought of those who never returned from their flights, those whose names would never be engraved on a plaque, but whose courage shaped the future just the same. She thought of families who waited for calls that never came, and young pilots who still trembled before their first solo flight. She wished them peace and courage. Always courage. A soft breeze stirred, rustling the sand and sage across the flat base. It felt like a promise. Dana opened her eyes, a faint smile forming at the corner of her lips. The road ahead would not be easy. It never had been. But she had learned something essential. Survival was never just about making it out alive. It was about shaping what came after, about fighting again and again for a future where others didn't have to suffer the same way. And so, with the night stretching out before her, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Rock stepped into the darkness. Not to retreat, but to keep going. One more step forward, into skies still unpredictable, still dangerous, still worth defending. Her story was far from over. It was alive in every pilot she mentored, every reform she sparked, every scar someone now dared to show. A story of truth, of resilience, and of the unbreakable will to rise. Dana's story is more than just a testimony of survival. It's a reminder that pain, no matter how harrowing, can be transformed into purpose. It's a call to arms, a challenge to rise above trauma and use it as a force for change, for truth, for safety, and for a future shaped by courage rather than silence. Her journey makes it unmistakably clear. Resilience isn't just about pushing through suffering, but about making that suffering matter. Whether you wear the uniform of a pilot, serve in another corner of the military, or simply draw strength from stories of perseverance, Dana Rock's voice resonates. Her scarred wrist isn't a symbol of defeat. It's a mark of survival, a testament to the battles fought not only in the skies but in boardrooms, classrooms, and policy halls. Her courage teaches us that it is possible to speak out in a world that often values silence. And when one voice breaks through, it creates space for others to follow. Dana's legacy urges us to look deeper, to recognize that many around us are carrying invisible wounds, fighting battles no one else sees. Her example is a blueprint for empathy, for listening, for offering support, even when we don't fully understand the weight someone else is bearing. In a culture that too often demands stoicism, her vulnerability becomes an act of resistance. And through that resistance, we find connection. If her story has stirred something within you, whether it was her calm bravery during the malfunction, her relentless push to be heard, or the strength she showed turning tragedy into reform, carry that feeling forward. Let it guide your own moments of difficulty or your efforts to lift someone else who's struggling. You're not alone in what you're going through, and no matter how dark the path becomes, there is always a way forward, lit by resilience, truth, and the solidarity of those who refuse to let one another fall. Her voice is now part of a greater conversation, one that includes you. Each story shared, each perspective voiced, each moment of compassion offered, adds to that collective strength. And as we move ahead, remember, it's not about pretending to be unbreakable. It's about choosing, again and again, to stand back up, to keep flying, even when the systems fail. We'll be continuing to follow Dana's journey and many others like hers, stories that defy the expected, that bring human truth into the spotlight, and that help us understand what it really means to endure, what it really means to lead. Stay with us as we uncover more of these stories. Stay brave, stay open-hearted, and never forget, the smallest act of courage can ripple outward in ways that change everything.